We'll call to order the special.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. We will call to order the special joint meeting of the Board of Directors of the River District and the Water Projects Enterprise. And we will have a roll call of directors.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Alden Vandenbrink. Doug Monger. John Ely.
Here.
Kathleen Curry.
Here.
Kathy Chandler Henry.
Here.
Mark Catlin. Mark Rober.
Here.
Martha Whitmore.
Marty's here.
Mike Richard.
Here.
Reby Hazard.
Here.
Scott McGinnis.
Here.
Stan Winery. Steve Beckley.
Here.
Taylor Haas. And Tom Gray.
Here.
Great, thank you. We do have a quorum, and this was a special meeting called to discuss the tax bills that have been introduced at the legislature. And Zane sent an email to us very late in the night last night. Zane, sorry for no sleep again. You got 4 more days to go, and then you can take a nap. Maybe you can bring us up to speed on what's happening.
Yeah, generally speaking, a quick update on other legislation that staff is still working at the moment. Senate Bill 295 passed out of House Appropriations this morning since we last updated you on that bill. And just as a reminder, 295 is the Colorado River Drought Task Force legislation. There were amendments on second reading in the Senate that added a Front Range municipal water diverter and the representative of a statewide agricultural organization that with Farm Bureau or Colorado Cattlemen's in mind for that seat. We did also make some tweaks to that language, or were able to convince the sponsors to include conservancy districts and water and sanitation districts to the definition of local governments for those seats within the Colorado River Water Conservation District and the Southwestern District. So we want to make sure that conservancy districts and or water and sand districts have the opportunity to participate. The bill in front of you today, Senate Bill 303, is moving very quickly. It was brought forward, I think, late in the evening on Monday evening, was scheduled to be an Senate appropriations the next morning at 7:30 in the morning, which really was an untenable timeline for stakeholders and members of the public to review and be able to participate in the process. That said, it was pushed back to the afternoon day before yesterday so that folks could get their head around it a little bit more. I will say staff is still trying to dig through this and fully understand it, but ultimately it comes down to some of the bullet points that I included in my email to you late last night, and that it reduces residential assessment rates for owner-occupied properties or primary residences, and provides for reductions to non-residential property taxes, provides increases to residential exemptions adopted in the legislation that was meant to be temporary relief for property tax last year. That was Senate Bill 22238. It does allow senior citizens to maintain the homestead and transfer the homestead exemption if they are downsizing their properties, extends the reduced agricultural and renewable property rate from 29.6 to 26.4%. And then it authorizes the state to keep a portion of the Tabor surplus to backfill special districts, local governments, and others that rely on property tax. There's some, I think, meaningful questions and concerns around that, just not knowing whether a backfill will be available if we see a significant recession in the 10 years that this bill would be in effect. Last comment before I talk a little bit about some of the politics and what we've been doing between introduction and now is that this is a referred measure. They would send the question to the voters. The question that is included in the language is a rather straightforward question. It's asking statewide voters whether they want to reduce their property taxes. And usually these types of fiscal questions on the ballot are they face headwinds from the beginning, just by virtue of the fact that most voters don't fully comprehend these types of technical questions when they arrive on the ballot. I think that this one, as worded, and given the pressures that are on individual homeowners in the state with regards to property taxes, would have, at least many are saying that it would have a good chance, or at least not face some of the headwinds that other fiscal questions have faced in the past. So where are we now? Staff saw this and had some pretty significant concerns upon introduction, really just focused on what would this mean for our future revenues at the River District and for conservancy districts and other folks that are not Title 32 special districts. As it was introduced, most of the special district provisions for backfill applied to Title 32 districts. With that in mind, staff was able to work with the sponsors and with the bill drafter to get some language included on second reading that would make special districts like ours, especially the multi-county districts, the Title 37 districts and others, eligible for the top tier of backfill provision within the bill. That's up to 90% of backfill of revenues lost could be backfilled. However, if the revenues associated with a specific county have more than a 20% growth in 2023 or for any year subsequent, we would not be eligible for that backfill. So there's a 20% threshold that is making a number of folks nervous, and I think that includes us. Council and Andy Mueller have been helping me to dig through this and try to understand what it would mean for us. We do have some, I think we're resting a little easier because of some language related to revenues approved by the voters. I'll ask Peter or Andy or Jason to chime in on that. But ultimately, let me just wrap up by saying this bill is moving quickly. It is likely to pass. I wouldn't expect that they are moving this under the timeline they're moving it, and at the pace at which it's moving, if they didn't have a solid block of support within the majority caucus. So at this moment, staff is working to do everything we can to make sure that we're protected. And I do think that council probably has some additional comments to make related to some protections that we may or may not have.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in if you wish, Madam President.
Yes, please.
And so this bill is really a beast. It's very complicated. My last thought in looking at it was that it ought to include a provision that includes a 100% increase in the salary of county assessors, because I don't know how they're going to figure all of this out. But basically, as I understand it, it includes two main provisions. One is a cap on a growth, or a cap on revenue, and the other is the reduction in assessed values. And both of those will be are contingent on the approval of the referred measure. So voters have to approve it, and that has to be by a 55% majority these days. So at first we were very concerned, obviously, about the cap because of our recent mill levy election, but thankfully, as we read the language with respect to the cap on revenue, it would not include revenue from a mill levy that has been approved by voters of the local government, us and our voters, at an election held before, on, or after this coming November. That obviously includes 7A, and because that was held in 2020, that is before this year. Our interpretation of our language of 7A is that it authorized the entire 0.5 mils, 0.5 mil that we assess today, and therefore that all of our revenue, our mill levy revenue, is exempt from the cap. Obviously, our enterprise revenue would be exempt anyway. That, I think, we're good even if the bill passes. Now, in theory, somebody could say, no, your mill levy election in 2020 only off, the amount that's exempt is only that amount that of the increase. I don't think that is a correct interpretation given the language that we carefully drafted when we prepared and the board adopted the 7A, and because it's clear that it says that the district taxes shall be increased by a certain amount and by such amounts as are generated annually thereafter from an additional property tax levy of 0.248 mils for a total mill levy of 0.5 mils. So we were very clear to include the total mill in there, and hopefully that, if this ever goes forward and is adopted by the voters, that our mill levy revenue would not be capped. However, if it does go forward, then our revenue would be subject to the reductions in the assessed valuations that the bill provides for. Now, those reductions are set for a period of, I think, 10 years. But it's my understanding that the legislature can then extend the reduced assessed valuations so long as it has the money to backfill, and the fund to backfill. So that brings us to the backfill. Even if the cap doesn't come into play, for example, if there's a recession and we're taxing at a reduced assessed rate, we may suffer a reduction in our collected revenue. That's what the backfill provision is for. And the backfill provision was, if you can believe it, even more complicated. But it is, as I understand it, and it's even more complicated for an entity like ours that is located in multiple counties. And so, for example, if we qualified for the backfill as an entity, one portion of our county that didn't had a lower increase in valuation would be subject to a higher rate of reimbursement than other areas that were subject to that had a higher increased valuation. However, if the district as a whole has an increase in assessed valuation that is greater than 20%, my understanding is that none of the district, including the portions of the district in counties that had a lower increase, would be subject and eligible to the backfill revenue that comes from the Tabor surplus. We believe, Andy can speak better to this, but that our increased revenue this year will be far in excess as a whole, as a district as a whole, will be greater than 20%. And therefore, we would not qualify for the backfill this year. The language in the bill also includes some unfortunate, I think, drafting. I'm not sure whether it was intentional or not, but it says that if you as a local government were ineligible to receive a reimbursement because you had in a prior property tax year exceeded the 20% qualification limit for the backfill, then you don't get a backfill ever. That's kind of how it can be interpreted today. You could fix that quite easily by just saying in the prior property tax year, but as currently drafted, it says in a prior property tax year. So if we exceeded it in 2022, in 2023, in theory, we could be prevented from getting backfill in any portion of the river district for any subsequent year that the bill is in effect. That is kind of in my mind, the worst case scenario in terms of river district revenue. There's obviously a lot of other issues involved in it with respect to conservancy districts and other water entities as well. But I'll stop talking there. I know it's confusing, and I frankly, it's very confusing. My interpretation may not be spot on, but Andy and Jason and I have spent some time looking at it. I think we're finally getting to understand what it's intended to do.
Thank you. Andy, do you want to chime in before we start?
I guess I just want to, I think Zane and Peter hit the highlights and the details, but I just from a broad brush perspective, this legislation appears consistent with some of the other things we've seen this legislative session, where it's the centralization of revenue. So it's an increase in the state's revenue by lifting the Tabor cap at the state by 1%, or 165 million next year, while at the same time imposing local caps and limitations on local governments, and creating all sorts of management problems. And I would say in our case, the potential that we become dependent on the good graces of the state for funding or quote backfilling us, and fairly contrary to the intention of our voters, contrary to the intention ever of the West Slope with respect to our own water security. So just from my perspective as your general manager, I think it's a really bizarre take. I'm not saying, by the way, I want to be really clear. I think our property tax laws in our state are extremely problematic, and the way that they operate are very, very inequitable at times. And in some of our counties, we've seen these massive increases in valuations, and there are some legitimate reasons to be looking at this issue. The lack of consultation with any of the special districts affected by this, or property tax revenue districts by the state is really shocking. I think some of our other multi-county property tax districts like Colorado Mountain College, who have been very active in this discussion, were not consulted at all in the drafting of this particular quote solution here. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, definitely seems to be a pattern of introducing big, complicated things without talking to stakeholders. A concern. Director Whitmore?
I want to make sure that I understand how this interacts with Tabor, because under Tabor, there would already be a cap on revenues, and anything above that is supposed to either not be collected to start out with or supposed to be returned, right? So this purports to change that, it sounds like, by in a most disingenuous manner, it appears. Am I missing something?
No, I think that's accurate, Director Wetmore. It would create a new proposition HH cap that would be 1% greater than the Ref C cap that currently exists. It would, as Andy alluded to, use those to assist in alleviating the pain of rising property taxes for homeowners, one thing that minority members in the Appropriations Committee pointed to was, well, what about the voters and the citizens of Colorado that are not property tax owners who are potentially entitled to those Tabor refunds? I don't know that I have anything I can say that will assuage your concerns, but I think you have it right.
Great. Director McGinnis. You're on. There you go. Oops.
Sorry, they moved the box on my screen. At any rate, thank you. So I have a couple of points here. First of all, Zane, so is that what has occurred in the last 12 hours of the last day or so? Have you changed your opinion that we should be in opposition to this?
You know, I think what Peter laid out helps me to rest a little easier, that maybe this isn't going to impact us as much as we had initially thought when we saw it. I think some of the changes that were made on second reading are helpful. I do question, you know, how we approach this and whether we just say we outright oppose this type of approach and potentially restrict our ability to continue amending it as it moves into the second chamber in the coming days. I put out there kind of the creative position recommendation of oppose unless amended. We've seen some amends that have been helpful. I think there's a lot more that could be done to make this better, but I think it's up to the board to determine whether we're just trying to put lipstick on a pig here. My personal thoughts are, my professional recommendation is staff needs to be able to continue to work with the sponsors in some way in the few days that remain in the session. So some sort of direction from the board to seek amendments would be helpful. And that's my recommendation, is that we try to thread the needle and say oppose unless amended.
Thank you. And a couple other real rapid questions. First of all, I think it's important when we think of our county assessors here in Mesa County, my understanding with the bill, and correct me as I go along, Zane, but that every homeowner is going to have to sign an affidavit or have an inspection or something to show that the home is owner occupied. In Mesa County, that would be tens of thousands of homes. Second of all, that the backfill provision, my understanding in the analysis I saw initially was that you would have available $128 million for backfill, but the state of Colorado would get to keep $1.8 billion for the money they've collected. So they collect $1.8 billion, but they only throw $128 million back. It exempts school districts, which certainly in Mesa County, I assume in all our counties, is probably the heaviest property tax payment. And probably the other important issue I think we have to think about very seriously here in the board, because, you know, when we went to the taxpayers, and Andy, this was your policy, when we went to the taxpayers and asked them to increase taxes for our district, Andy's approach, and the board at that time, but Andy was very strong on it, we're upfront with the taxpayers. We're not going to try and do some kind of switch game. We're not going to ask them to help us on one hand and then take the money out of their wallet or get it out of their pocket on the other hand. We were very straight with the taxpayers. Here, what is happening with this bill is a lot of us, and I just got my property tax notice yesterday, the assessment notice. Mine went up about 35%. There are going to be a lot of shocked people, and there are going to be a lot of angry people out there. And so what's happening with this bill, in my opinion, correct, they're not being straight with the taxpayer. They're saying we're going to give you relief, but then they're going to backfill this by restricting their Tabor refunds. And the Tabor refunds, even if it's just a small amount of money to people, it's a big deal to the people. And so here we have a constituency, I'll speak for my county, Mesa County, that was, and I was a commissioner at the time, that was a strong point of us going out. I think 2 of the 3 of us supported it, but went out full bore to support the River District. They were upfront. They were being honest about it. The cause is obviously there, and it's transparent. Here, what's happening is in our county anyway, we're going to have a lot of very upset people. We're beginning to see slow down here, so maybe that will affect the Tabor into the future. But for us to say, and for us to support an effort by our state legislators to say, hey, don't worry, we're going to address this through an assessment reduction or this bill. But on the other hand, we're going to backfill by giving your local districts, which by the way, this is money they weren't expecting anyway, a lot of these districts. This is going to be a windfall for a lot of the taxing entities. They did not budget for this money. This is kind of happy money, and you combine that with the federal funds that have come into this area. They've got a lot of money. My point, and so what's happening is with these taxpayers, they're going to get hit hard on the assessment, and then they're not dumb. They're going to figure out what these legislators are up to, especially since there's time between now and the election, that, hey, this is just a switcheroo. They're telling you you're going to relieve it, but guess what? You're not going to get the Tabor refund you would have gotten otherwise. So my point being is, Andy, and look for your input here. I mean, I sat up last night saying, wow, are we really being, if we support this, is that really fair to the taxpayers that we talked to 2 years ago and said, hey, we're coming right to you. Here's our story. There's no tricks involved here. It really bothers me because this is not, this backfill is being funded at the taxpayer's expense by not giving them the money was overpaid through Tabor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director McGinnis. Really helpful thoughts. Other comments on this? Zane, is there also is it the same bill or a companion bill that is the $40,000 reduction in your home assessment value? Is that this bill or something else?
It's the same bill.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute.
But I don't think that's a straight 40,000, across the board for all residential properties. It varies based on the calculation that I haven't delved into.
Right. And then there's a lowering of commercial tax rate as well, I believe. Right. Other comments? We have a suggested position of oppose unless amended. Director Munger? Oh, you're on mute, Doug.
Apologize. Yeah, this is what happening way too fast, and especially I'm very concerned about the will of the voters when we went to debruce ourselves and that we were keeping extra revenue and being able to put that to good use. I'm really leery of playing games in the sand with the state. We saw what happened with the school finance bill when we were going to do this and that happened and whatever. Again, the revenues were approved by the voters, and so I don't know. So there's a difference between some of these things that are debruced and or having to lower the mill levy because of the increased revenues and decreasing the mill levy that you would have to do at my county government when I was there. We'd have to reduce the mill levy because of those extra revenues, and we'd put it into the Tabor cap. But hey, whatever. I'm really afraid that this is going to be one of those things that we pass the bill, and as Nancy Pelosi said a couple 4 or 5 years ago, we'll pass the bill and then we'll figure out how we're going to implement it and what it does. I'm really concerned about that. I'm concerned about who's going to be the regulator of this thing. I mean, is DOLA going to be taking care of this stuff? Man, that is really scary. I mean, DOLA's already underfunded as well. So I don't know. And I'm really concerned of fixing this situation in 1 week. And then, we'll get it done tomorrow. We'll have it all figured out. And again, we'll see what happens when we go to start implementing it. So I'll shut up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Director Munger. Peter.
Thank you. I just wanted, and maybe Andy or Zane could tackle this a little bit more as well, but well, 2 points. Number one, I would like to suggest an amendment, and it's the one that would clarify that if we exceed an increase in valuation as a district wide of 20% in in the last year, that doesn't qualify, or that doesn't exclude us from getting a backfill if in subsequent years our the next succeeding increase in valuation is less than 20%. As I read it now, we would be excluded. Again, I'm not sure I'm 100% accurate on that, but that's how I would interpret it. The other thing I wanted to defer to Andy and Zane on was the ability to make changes like that now, but if, depending upon, which I think is likely, if it passes and we still don't like it, we obviously could take a position on the referred measure at our July board meeting or any subsequent board meeting. Make a resolution.
Good. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Peter. Director Curry.
Thank you. I don't know if you guys can hear me very well. The basement got really loud.
We can hear you.
I apologize. So 2 questions. Have we been able to quantify what the impacts might be to our revenue stream if the bill were to pass the way it looked coming out of second reading yesterday, or is it too hard to do that?
Ian Phillips is on the call. I don't know if Ian wants to chime in with this. He did some number crunching for us that I took to the Appropriations Committee day before yesterday. I don't have his analysis in front of me, but if he's unavailable to chime in, I'll just say that the conclusion was $6 million over 10 years in lost revenue to the district. Ian, what am I missing there?
Yeah, no, that's kind of a really rough estimate, and in simple terms, it's a very complicated bill, and without having all of the information available, I went off basically just the assessment rates alone and used our district is pretty much split almost 50-50 between residential and non-residential, just to give you guys an idea. But yeah, rough terms, it's around 6 million.
Over what period of time?
Between from 2023 to 2032.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a quick follow-up also that just politically speaking, some folks are going to see it as a positive to have their property taxes go down. So I do think it's good to make sure we think about how our constituents might view this thing. But I understand that we are trying to do what's best for the district, but it's good we're having this discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments from directors? It certainly
Madam
does.
President,
Yes.
we do have Gail Berry on the line as well. Gail is one of our 2 eyes and ears down at the Capitol. She's much more up to speed on fiscal policy than I am. I don't know if Gail, if you're available to chime in on process and what's next.
Sure. Thanks, Zane, and thanks, Madam Chair. Happy to do that. One thing I did, right now, the bill is on 3rd reading in the Senate, and it's pretty much stuck there. They've been filibustering several other bills that are ahead of it all morning, which is to our benefit, frankly. Time is running out and it is stuck there. One comment though, and Peter, you made a really good point about the language on the exclusion. The sponsors intend it to be that way, that if you're excluded once, you are excluded forever. Unfortunately, I think your points are good ones, but they specifically said that in the hearings in the committee and on the floor on the second reading debate. So I know we would have no traction to get that amended. That's their intent, unfortunately. And there are just many complex things, about the bill. And to be clear, one of the other things that came out on the second reading debate yesterday, people's taxes will still go up. This is a reduction in the increase. So, I mean, significantly. And so I think that is one of the things that when it does go to the ballot, it not only a portion of the reduction of the increase will be paid by the person themselves by giving up part of their Tabor refund. They may be then expecting their tax bill not to go up, but it still will. So I think it's going to be a really interesting campaign from those who oppose it. And there will be a competing Proposition 21 on the ballot as well by the Michael Fields group. So it'll be, I think we're a long ways from a November passage. It's pretty much a crapshoot in many ways.
Thanks, and that's a really good point. All very good points, Gail. Thank you. The last thing I would add is that this, you may remember from my state affairs memo at the quarterly board meeting, I discussed the competing interests from the Michael Fields group, as well as the Bell Policy Center has 8 titles that they're currently working on. This proposed referred measure will take care of the Bell policy approach. So the left side has been assuaged and is now joining forces with the administration on this, it appears. But there will still be competition on the ballot from other measures that Proposition 21 would be problematic for us. It would set a hard cap on property tax revenues. And the only entities, as I remember my reading, the only entities that would be eligible for backfill under that scenario would be fire protection districts.
Director Whitmore.
Madam President, I would move staff recommendation on this, not because I think this is a good bill. I think it's a horrible bill. I think it's one of the most disingenuous pieces of shenanigans that I've seen in a long time. Having said that, I think it's important for our staff to be able to continue to be involved in the discussions. And so I move staff recommendation kind of reluctantly, but on that basis.
Great. And to clarify, that is to oppose unless amended. Do we have a second? And then I will open it up for public comment if anyone in the public would like to chime in.
I'll second it.
Okay, second by Director Rober from Delta County. Do we have any comments from anyone in the public who's here at our meeting today? All right, I don't see any, and I certainly concur, Director Whitmore, and Andy, you mentioned this too. It's a yet another move which feels like centralization of power and authority at the state and away from the hands of not only local districts but local constituents across the Western Slope. So very concerning. All right, all in favor of the motion to support staff recommendation, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the motion passes. And Zane, Peter, good luck. At least, all right. Do we have any report from our general manager?
Nothing at this time. Just want to thank you again for yet another special meeting here during the legislative session. Sorry to keep calling you back. So
we don't have anything to do on Thursdays but eat lunch, right? Anything?
I do have one other update consistent with your, no worries. Consistent with the board's motion to oppose House Bill 1255 at last Thursday's call. That's the state bill that would preempt local government's ability to enact housing growth restrictions. We've joined on with a number of West Slope municipalities and counties on an open letter opposing it. That bill also is moving forward. It's on, it passed with some amendments last night, I believe, out of the Senate. We're working on some things there. I will say that thing is also a beast of a bill and has been it appears as though it has a it has a destiny that it is following, and it appears as though the majority of the majority caucus is in support of moving it. I can provide a written update on that at a later point, but right now we're still engaged. We're working with other West Slope governments to try to seek amendments or just kill it outright. But at the moment, it appears to continue to move forward. So, and then lastly, the other housing bill, the companion 213, has been restored to its or a number of the controversial components that were stripped out by the Senate Appropriations Committee have been reinserted by the House. That is going to create a battle royale either in conference committee or potentially when it goes back to the Senate, a vote not to concur with the House version. TBD on what that's going to look like in a matter of days. But again, we'll try to keep you in the loop on how it ends up and what ultimately plays out.
Great. Thank you, Zane. We have Director McGinnis and then Director Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just Andy, real quickly, and not on the agenda, but what are we hearing on the runoff? We're starting to see flooding here in Mesa County. Do we have a quick recap, or some of the other members have some comments what they're seeing in their areas? I think I can discuss that maybe under general business, just out of curiosity.
Sure.
I think the runoff, Scott, is very strong. And as you said, there's flooding in some areas. Certainly we're aware of flood warnings, both in Routt and Montrose County and different areas. I would assume they're, Scott, I got a call from one of your constituents in Las Colonias Park wondering when their commercial properties were going to go underwater. So you've got some worried people down there. That's that I think is it is good to see the water. It would be nice if it came off a little slower, right? So
Great. Director Gray.
Oh, thank you. I might have missed, but I was just going to ask, what's the status of the task force bill at this time? Has it changed any?
Yeah, I apologize. I think I gave a very quick overview before we jumped into 303, but it did pass out of House Appropriations this morning. It passed the House Agriculture Committee unanimously yesterday. The only changes between when we discussed it on Thursday of last week and today are that we did move forward with adding a Front Range municipal diverter, as well as the representative of a statewide water organization. So Farm Bureau or Cattlemen will have a seat. We added stipulations that the agricultural producers and the agricultural organization rep must be the owners of water rights, so that we're not getting folks in there that may be from, nothing against Baca County, but we're not hoping to have dryland farmers on this task force. And then amended it to include water conservancy districts and water and sanitation districts within the definition of a local government for those 2 seats within Southwest and River District territorial boundaries.
Very good. Thank you. I did get the tail end of that. I just didn't get the first part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And anything from General Counsel update?
I don't have anything further today, Madam President. Thank you to you and the board. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you. Anything further from any directors? All right. Thanks everyone for hopping on here, and thanks especially to all our staff who were having some late nights and early mornings keeping up with all of this legislation. We stand adjourned.
Thank you all.
Bye.